Think that quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards? How about that receiver in Miami grabbing a touchdown? Check out DraftKings Pick 6, the newest way to compete against others and play fantasy football to win cash with DraftKings. Pick a player and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat like yards, touchdowns, catches, and more. Get your picks right and you'll win cash. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5 and get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed, plus 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer expires 9/19, only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. 1 per new customer. Reward issued as $50 in non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 6 months. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at NFL.com/terms.
The DFS Studio is brought to you by DraftKings. Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Well. We are back here on this fine Tuesday in September, the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined once again by Matthew. What you know about Kirk O'Chain's bets?
I don't have any words, man. I'm dejected, defeated. It feels like it's like week 18 and there's been a grind and we just missed out on the playoffs. Like, that's what I feel right now for what the Eagles have done to me. Week 2 of the NFL season. What a joke. What a complete joke. This team, they're frauds, man. Going back to last year when they were 10-1. And everything was great, and they were sneaking by all these teams. You and I kept coming on the show. I'm like, they can't keep winning this way. What do they do? Collapse. This is their 4th loss, going back to that 10-1 start, that they have lost when they have been ahead of the 2-minute warning. That is so bad. Give me a break. This team is a joke. They're fraudulent. They are not going to do anything in the postseason with this offense and this defense. It's just, man. They are so bad, and they're frauds. So here we are.
We are recording this just the morning right after the Monday night game, the Monday Night Miracle. And I'll just say this.
I hate this team.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'll just say this. I am not really a dunker. You know, I was like 3s and D when it comes to basketball. And I'm not here to dunk on you because my personality type is I wish I wasn't as empathetic as I am. But like my first thought at the very end of the game wasn't like, man, Betz is an idiot. It's like, oh man, I've been there. I have been there in those losses. And I screenshotted all the win probabilities. And at one point it was like 67% us. And I was like, no, this isn't how this works. And then I screenshotted when you guys were at 97%. I go, okay, that's more like it. And we somehow made a little fun comeback. I was hurt because I needed Devonta Smith to score 0.5 points in a league, and he did not get there.
Oh my gosh.
I lost.
That is so painful. And, you know, Jason needed Goddard. It was against you and Mike,
yes.
Right? In League of Record. So I was not obviously sweating the Eagles just being incompetent, but also following that live was super fun. We also had a Devonta Smith over, so that cash, that was nice at least. But it was just a night full of emotions that at one point I was like, this is great. We're going to be 2-0, no problem. And now I'm like, are we legit? Because they take on the Saints this week. The Saints offense looks incredible, and the Phillies defense is one of the worst, if not the worst, in football right now. Are they 1-2, and then they get the Bucks after that? The Bucks are a good team. Are they 1-3? Like, Nick Sirianni's job is, it's not safe.
Yeah, I went through some deep dive. I rewatched the game this morning just because I wanted to feel alive again. And man, Bijan looked good. Bijan ran all of his carries at 11 personnel. He was the exact opposite in week 1. And then I watched Saquon's and I was like, man, Saquon, first down, just chunk gain. Second down, And then they never gave him a carry on third down. Ever. The whole game.
Yep. Both running games looked awesome. And I'm not sure how much to read into that for like the Eagles offensively. I mean, that the identity is the offensive line, and with AJ Brown out, like it should go through Saquon. So that's great. But this Philly run defense, like I'm pretty confident you could be back there, Kyle, and average about 4.5 yards per carry. They are allowing 6.5 yards per carry through 2 games. That is the 7th worst in NFL history. They've allowed 315 rushing yards in 2 games. That is the most by an Eagles team since 1986. Give me a break. This team is fraudulent.
You know what? I get... See, that's what I'm saying. I'm going back to my empathy here. I totally understand the way that you are coping with this. I have done many, many times, and our job helps us do this, is that right afterwards you go, all right, I'm just going to go into the stats. Let me just go so deep that I can actually get my head around this. I remember when we lost to the Patriots in the Super Bowl, I just did a deep dive the next day and went through every single Super Bowl performance to realize that James White put up the greatest PPR performance of all time in that game against the Falcons and whatever. But so I'm with you. And we're going to talk about this slate. We're going to turn the page, talk about week 3. But you are getting a raw... Betz and I haven't talked to each other other than some, funny little quips and, just me sending as many Kirk Cousins things as possible. Hey, at least, do you feel... I mean, fandom aside, like Kirk as a person, I feel like you just got to root for him because last week it was just so bad and so painful to watch. And you're like, all right, he's a fun person to root for.
Yeah, and I think if you watched like the post-game interview with Lisa Salters, he actually seemed like he had some emotion let out of like the relief of I can do this with a new team and it's going to work kind of thing. So yeah, I'm happy for Kirk. He's a really easy guy to root for, obviously. If anybody watched the quarterback show on Netflix, he's like just a regular dad.
Coles man.
And you and I, man. I mean, he's a Coles man. I have a soft spot in my heart for a guy like that. So yeah, it's fun to see Kirk succeed. But what's wild about the Kirk Cousins situation, and this is something I say on the show all the time, like last week, it felt like this offense is so inept and this is not going to work and the sky is falling. And 1 week later, 1-1. Like nothing in the NFL is as good as bad as it ever seems. So even though I'm coming on this show and I'm like, the Eagles are terrible,
right,
yada, 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 they'll probably bounce back at some point sooner than later. The same is true for a lot of other teams. The Raiders, right? In week 1, Antonio Pierce punting on that 4th and 1 call. Like, what are you doing? Come out and upset the Ravens. So the NFL variance is wild week to week and things change so quick.
Yeah, Marvin Harrison's a great example of like, okay, everyone and their mama was ready to jump ship after one game. And then in one quarter, he goes, shut up, all of you. Oh man, I was so happy because I'm Team Marv all the way. But on this episode, we will review last week's cash. We will even get to give some shout out to some listeners who won big. And then we will look at week 3, talk about the main slate. It is a interesting slate, very different than last week. Last week, man, 10 games in the early window. My wife asked me, she goes, man, there's a lot going on right now. And I was like, it's not normally like this, where it's just like nonstop. There's only 3 games in the late window, but it's more balanced this week. Sunday night game. I don't know if you saw the schedule. Chiefs at Falcons, coming off a huge 1-point win. Man, you don't just walk.
Double primetime Kirk.
Yeah, you don't just walk into the Mercedes-Benz Dome and expect to... I mean, come on. We were not a great home team, actually.
The line looks fishy, though, to me. I think it's 4.5
right
in
now.
favor of the Chiefs. My initial gut reaction was like, ooh, that seems super fishy. But the Chiefs like haven't covered in like 2 years. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Falcons defense looks a lot better than we thought it would. And maybe...
They got some guys.
Yeah, I mean, they play Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts, like 2 guys who can't really throw the ball, but whatever. In the middle of the field, they can't.
Well, in that game, in week 1, did you see the next-gen stats chart?
For Fields, yeah.
With Justin Fields, literally every throw was the numbers outside towards the sideline. It was just like, we're not throwing to the middle of the field where Jesse Bates is. Not a chance.
All right, let's review last week.
straight cash, homie.
Every week, Betz and I get to review the previous slate. I also write a free article on the site where I review my cash lineup and kind of just walk through the process. This past week, I also walked through how you calculate weighted opportunities, which I just want to encourage you. If you are just making cash lineups based on vibes alone, you might be missing out on just like, hey, like Deebo Samuel is one of those plays this past week that I landed on because we saw the involvement that he had in the running game. And so when you weigh out his rush attempts and target share, it's like, okay, this player is different than just any other wide receiver at his price point. So for me personally, I thought I had a good feel for the slate. I messaged you, man, I feel really good about the slate. And it actually was a great week for me in cash, in double ups. And then also I had some tournament teams that were looking hot for a while. And then Brock Purdy kind of fizzled out. But it was actually a very good week for me.
Nice. Yeah, I had a pretty rough week in cash. I landed on, I thought the toughest part of the cash slate, because at quarterback, it was, Jaden or Mahomes, it was pretty straightforward. Like, you're most likely playing Brees. Jordan Mason should have been a lock for a lot of people. Everybody played Cooper Kupp, so the injury didn't really matter in cash. And then the decision point for me really came down to like the 6.5 to like 6,800 range of like Deebo, Rashee Rice, Kyron, Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, those guys, I considered all of them, and I went back and forth on a bunch of them. I ended up landing on the Deebo Kyron situation, and obviously the Rams fell on their face. And we talked about that from like a game theory standpoint for tournaments. If you just fade the Rams and like you get that right, the rest of your lineup doesn't have to be that incredible to just have so much leverage on the field. It's like, from a game theory standpoint, I think it's a good learning experience for tournaments. For cash, man, like a running back that's going to touch the ball projected that many times with that workload, I probably would have made the decision again. But this is the part of DFS that I think a lot of people lose, myself included, is like, I just had this, gut feel of like, the Rams situation is so fragile with how many injuries they have.
You talked the whole week about
the offensive line. In week 1, James Cook averaged sub 4 carry against this defense. This is not the same Cardinals rush defense of last year. They've actually been pretty good against the run. So all of those things considered, I knew Rashee Rice was going to have a great game. I knew it. And what did I do? Played Kyron anyway. So this is a learning point for myself to trust, how you feel and your takes and that kind of thing. And not always be a slave to the projections, which admittedly sometimes I am in cash games.
It's so funny because I was the one that talked up Kyron the most throughout the entire week. And I don't know if I put the bug in your ear because I didn't land on Kyron in cash. Like, I waited out and I didn't land on a 3 running back build the whole time I was talking it out. And by the way, I know that like you hear our opinions on a Tuesday, you hear our opinions on a Friday, just a couple of dudes talking on a mic about football. And it can be easy to say like, well, you said this, how did you not land there? Well, it's kind of just feeling it out and moving from, this is what I feel, so the matchup, where could this go wrong? Because I think you always pointed out where that matchup could go wrong. And we said, if you had too many Rams, it could be dangerous. And so I took that advice in tournaments where I completely faded the Rams in tournaments. And it actually worked out very well for me. You and I played a lot of Malik Neighbors, somebody we talked up, even some Daniel Jones. That one felt good. But I think the nuance of Cooper Kupp, it didn't matter what he did. It really didn't matter for anybody out there. It kind of came down to a couple of different 1v1 or 2v2 swaps. And if you got on the right page of some of those guys, you probably felt really, really good. So yeah, you can check that out on the website. And in the DFS Pass, we have all of our picks for cash, for GPPs. You can get all of those in there. But we did have some listeners who won big. Betz, I will let you read off a couple of Discord members. And by the way, if you do want to post in there, we will get to celebrate with you. Might even get to read it on the podcast. So a couple listeners here, Betz, read them off.
Yeah, what a name. Cheese is the Discord username
Chester
with
Cheeto
the Z.
as the avatar.
Love that. He said, listen to the Friday podcast on Sunday morning. Took down the nickel on DK this afternoon. It's been a great day. He later shared that the best, or the takeaway that he had that landed on his lineup, he was like, you're right. No one's going to play the Cardinals. What if I just play the Cardinals instead of the Rams? Played a Marv stack with Kyler. Ended up taking down Marv, taking down a ton of money for him, which is awesome. And then we also have, the props have been great. for what I've struggled early in the year with DFS, props have been helping keep this thing afloat. They've been great. We had, I don't know how to say this.
Tates?
Tates? Tates? But the T's are capitalized, so I don't know. Listened to every pod and followed the props. Took down a 5-leg parlay plus 13.59 for a huge payday. So shout out to you guys, and hopefully a lot of other people listening or in the DFS Pass had a really good week too.
Yeah. Now, normally we don't say parlay together our picks in general, but this person turned $100 into $1,500 just from what we talked about on the podcast. And we'll go through the segment again. Our Borg Betz segment is on fire right now. I'm 4-0. You're 3-1. So if you follow those props just on what we said in the podcast, I mean, you're sitting pretty. And I really enjoyed pick 6. Just it's been a good little payout for me so far. Just cautioning everybody, that is really hot. Like our props are really, really hot right now. So I'm not saying like take less, but don't parlay them together all the time.
Yes, the officials in the DFS Pass, just for everybody wondering, we are up to, let me find it real quick. I think they're 12-5. So we're not going to hit 70% all year. It's just not going to happen. So there will be a 3-6 week coming probably pretty soon because that's how this works. So just caution to everyone, not saying jump ship or whatever, but maybe don't double down this week or next week. Just make sure that you're staying true to your bankroll and not getting too ahead of yourself there.
But they can call you directly for all of your locked picks, right?
Oh, of course, yeah. 3 easy payments of $29.99 per month. Yeah, I'll give you my personal cell, all those things. I'll text it right to your phone. 5-star locks only, guaranteed. Yeah,
so dfspass.com if you want to get all of those. In our props channel, our props alerts channel, if you are in the Discord, then you get those. You get those notifications before the lines move. Let's move on to week 3.
State of the main slate.
Each week, Betz and I refer to the lines at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's where Betz and I play. You can go to sportsbook.draftkings.com and we'll check in for a couple of wagers. I am a little bit salty about my Washington under. I took Washington as one of my stronger season-long win totals, under 6.5. And I'm just mad at the Giants, man. I felt like I had a good read on the slate and on that game I talked about on this podcast a week ago. I was like, man, I'd take Giants money line. And if you told me that the Giants would score 3 touchdowns and the Commanders would score 0 and they would lose the game, I would say you are crazy, my friend. And yet they somehow decided that they could do it. Poor Malik Neighbors. He had a crazy game, and then also technically threw away part of the game on an easy 4th down conversion. So, Washington under, I think I still feel fine about it, but it was one of those where it's like, oh, come on, you guys can do this.
Yeah, their next 3 matchups, they go on the road this week to Cincy. That's a Monday night game. There's 2 Monday night games this week. And then they take on Arizona on the road, and then they're home at Cleveland, and then on the road at Baltimore through week 6. So it's a decently tough stretch coming up here that I think the under still looks good, but that one would have been nice to have because that when you look at their schedule, you play the Giants, like that's a coin flip every week, it feels like. So it would have been nice for that to land on the right side for Washington, but nonetheless, we will wait and see. I have terrible news for everybody holding an Anthony Richardson long shot MVP ticket. It's over. It's over in week 2. And we don't want to be overreactionary to small sample sizes, but there's one quarterback in the league right now that has a worse completion rate over expectation than Anthony Richardson, and he's currently on the bench for the Carolina Panthers. That is Bryce Young. Andy mentioned this summer on the main show about him as a passer. I talked about, I'm high on him for fantasy, and I think it's still going to be great for fantasy. But when we were doing the Dynasty show, entering the season, we all talked about, 1 or 2 things we're just, kind of worried about in the back of our head. It was a very nice, venting session just for our mental health. And I was just like, I want this out there. I am kind of getting worried about Anthony Richardson as a passer, and it's been bad. And losing to Malik Willis and the Packers certainly doesn't help. So that was a fun long shot in the summer. 0-2 right now the Colts are. I think it's gone.
Yeah, you can just write it off on your taxes as just summer fun. It's just I was waiting around for football, was playing some best ball, and I was like, you know what? What do you think about Anthony Richardson, MVP? You were just enjoying your drinks on the back porch, and
that's probably what led to placing the bet, is the drinks.
So man, I went through and watched the film again because I think I want to give the Packers credit because I think their defense looked great and they forced them into a ton of terrible situations. Every year, I try to emphasize this, that the NFL swings on a pendulum. And you and I will talk about this a lot on the Dynasty podcast. I'm doing some more scheme, hand in the dirt stuff. But the NFL has trended in the direction of basically saying zone defense, you have to beat it. If you can't consistently beat it, you're not going to start anymore. Hence the reason Bryce Young is, not starting anymore because he's never thrown a touchdown pass against zone. He's not good against it. On the other end of the spectrum, though, NFL teams are playing man coverage more and more this year, and you're seeing teams run the ball more. And it's kind of interesting because Anthony Richardson, I don't know if you knew this, Betz, he has more interceptions than completions against man coverage this year. 2-1.
I would believe that.
It's just a different way of throwing the ball. It's like you want people who can create separation. Michael Pittman's not really that guy. He's a guy who loves to sit in zone. Adonai Mitchell, he's intriguing, but he wasn't a separator in college. And then you have Alec Pierce, who's basically just like run a 9 route, go do it. And so it's interesting the way that team's built. They're going to keep running into issues if teams are asking him to throw it in one-on-one tight window situations. That's just not what he's great at. So, it stinks because we're going to keep talking about him for fantasy. We didn't talk about him at all this past week. I was thinking about that. We didn't mention him as a play we wanted to play at all. A week after, he was the play. And that's just kind of how DFS works. It's like you're swinging week to week based on prices, based on matchup, based on everything else. We're like, I didn't even consider Anthony Richardson. Other than Jonathan Taylor, who was a good play in GPPs, I didn't play any other Colts.
Yeah, same. I think just the game environment with Malik Willis on the other side was so likely to be a slog and just kind of try to win with variance on the Packers side, which credit to LaFleur. He's been awesome since he's been there, and his game plan this week against the Colts was fantastic. So that's why I wasn't on Richardson. It's not that I don't want to be on him each week when there's a chance that he can run for 50, 60 yards on a touchdown and maybe throw a deep bomb. It's just that, you got to kind of pick and choose your spots when it makes sense.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get into the Week 3 slate. Moving on, looking at these lines that we get from DraftKings Sportsbook, there are some dirty, gross games on this main slate. For instance, Giants at Cleveland's at 38.5. The Chargers and the Steelers, 35.5 is the line I'm seeing right now. And then the Packers and the Titans, the Malik Willis revenge game is at 36.5. Those are the games that we probably won't be talking about this week. So give me the ones on the other end of the spectrum that are the highest total.
Yeah, the Detroit and Arizona game is the top one on the slate. That one is at 52.5 points with the Lions currently favored by 2.5. Philly taking on New Orleans on the road. That one is actually flipped since last night's debacle. The Saints are now favored, and that game is up to 50 as of our recording. Dallas and Baltimore, that one is a 1-point spread in favor of Baltimore, up at 49.
I don't know if you do this ever, and obviously you wouldn't have done it because it was your Eagles, but I always see the lines on Monday before, for the week ahead, because they post them on DraftKings. And I look at some of the lines and I kind of circle a couple. I'm like, man, that looks kind of fishy. That looks kind of strange. And before the Monday night game, Philly was favored by 2.5 points on the road. So if you're one of those people that just wants to get ahead, whatever teams play on Sunday or Monday night, it's not a bad thing just to say if you have a lean, you could have taken New Orleans plus 2.5 on Monday night. If you just think okay, I think this line's a little off. We're not really betting sides and totals. Betz and I aren't doing that. Not talking about that much, but that one was a little strange to me. Which teams have the highest team implied totals for week 3?
Yeah, the Lions are at the top, 27.5 points. San Francisco, despite the Debo injury and CMC injury, still pretty healthy team total at 25.5. New Orleans, 25.3. Arizona and Baltimore are tied at 25 after that. So there's a lot of teams kind of packed in that 25 to 26-ish range this week that I don't think team totals are going to be super helpful in being these are the top tier, here's kind of the bottom tier, and here's everyone else to ignore it because everyone is so packly tight together in that 25-ish range.
This slate is so much more balanced, as I mentioned earlier, where you get to look at some games in the early window that we clearly like we're going to be talking about that Philly-New Orleans game. And then the later window has two games that are 49 or around 50, and then that game you mentioned, Detroit and the Cardinals. So how do we handle this slate differently? There's also two Monday night games. So it's condensed, there's fewer games, and it's also balanced out more from the morning and afternoon. So in general, how do you handle slates like this?
Well, when you look at which games are in that window, the late window specifically, just mentioned the 49ers. They're going to have a bunch of chalk pieces again. Jordan Mason's probably going to be the highest rostered running back. The Rams, they have no one left. So if you wanted to dip into the cheap guys, they're available. We just talked about Lions and Cardinals. They're a really fun, exciting matchup. Ravens and Cowboys, they're in the late window too. So to me, it kind of seems like most of the roster percentage is probably going to condense in the late window with the exception of a couple plays early. So knowing that, I'm going to probably try to prioritize late swap flexibility again. A little bit similar to last week, but last week was tough with only 3 games. This week, there's a lot of ways you can get off the board and change your lineup in the late window. If you start with chalk, if you're behind early, you can switch off of it. So I think prioritizing this slate and thinking about it from a late swap perspective is going to be really helpful, especially in tournaments.
I started going through this slate looking at just who the quarterbacks are. Like looking at the teams and just putting in names. And then there are so many games that their totals reflect the fact that their quarterbacks are just straight doo-doo. So for instance, Daniel Jones v. Deshaun Watson. Ugh, that doesn't look too great. You got Bo Nix in a game. Justin Fields bringing down that entire total. Will Levis v. Malik Willis, former best buddies and teammates. That's terrible. You have Caleb and Anthony Richardson, basically two of the least accurate quarterbacks and worst quarterbacks so far in completion percentage. Dalton v. Minshew, the matchup we've always wanted. And then the Skylar Thompson experience. So it's like, man, there's a bunch of quarterbacks on this slate that I just know I won't be circling those games. We'll talk about maybe some one-off plays. And when we get later on in the week, are there some roster percentage plays that you can do? Like, I want to at least bring up Andy Dalton because last time we saw him throw the football in a start, it was week 3 last year. So a full year ago. Did you see how many pass attempts he had in that game, Betz?
I can't recall off the top of my head.
What if I told you it was 58?
I wouldn't believe you, but because you're bringing it up for this show, I believe you.
Yeah, 58. And then Thielen had 14 targets in that game. He was 11 for 145 and 1 on the road in Seattle. So it's like, it's just fun things to bring up. And he's, by the way, Andy Dalton is 4,800. I just want to tempt you early in the week.
Also known as the same price as Desmond Ridder. So that's fun.
That's good stuff. So which games do you feel like are going to be the most popular?
Yeah, I mean, this one's not too shocking. I think that Detroit-Arizona game is one that people are going to want to play. But I was looking at some pricing this morning and just trying to, rough estimate, like how easy is it to stack? The thing is that it's not that easy to stack. So for me, when I look at the pricing, like Kyler's just below 7K, Goff's kind of in the mid 6K range. Marv is priced up after a really big game. McBride's the tight end 1 on the slate. And then on the Detroit side, of course, their key pieces are almost always priced up close to 7K for the running backs. And then, Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. So it's one that I think we want pieces of, but it's going to be really tough from a salary perspective to make it all work. So for me, I'm probably looking at that one more as like mini game stacks, like 1 Cardinal, 1 Lion, or 2 Cardinals and 1 Lion, or whatever. And maybe that includes the quarterback, maybe not, I'm not sure. But right now, the game environment looks great. 2 offenses we like. I think the pricing is just a little bit tricky.
Okay, I want to talk about Philly and New Orleans because after what happened on Monday night, and on top of that, based on what New Orleans has done the first 2 weeks, people are going to want to play Saints. And I watched every snap of their game this past week. It's a different offense. It's just a completely different group and mindset that we're looking at when it comes to the Saints. Rashid Shaheed in motion it makes him more than just a deep threat. So Shaheed is going to be interesting in tournaments. He's not that expensive. Chris Olave, by the way, is great. He's good. He saw 40-something% of their targets. He got tackled at the 1 on like a boss catch. Chris Olave is going to be a play that we're going to talk about. And then you brought up some stats about the Eagles' defense, and I'm using air quotes about their defense, Betz, because it's not good. And you started, some local Philly radios like, oh, look at this guy. He's got some stats about Philly. And it just shows how bad your team is right now on defense.
They're atrocious. 32nd yards per play. That's tied with the Rams, who have backups everywhere. 29th in EPA per play. 27th in sack rate. 23rd in quarterback pressures. A Philly edge defender has not recorded a sack in 6 games going back to last year. Let me repeat that. An edge rusher on the Eagles doesn't have a sack in 6 games going back to 2023. You can't win. You can't win with that defense. Now, against the run, let me tell you, they're equally as terrible. I already mentioned some of the historic numbers, but just for context, dead last in yards per carry allowed. They've allowed the 3rd most 10-plus yard runs. They've allowed the most rush yards over expectation per attempt. Yeah, and the Saints are rolling. The other thing about the Saints is Clint Kubiak, who, the meme of, the boyfriend and girlfriend walking and the other girl walks past and he turns and looks? I feel like we were into, Mike McDaniel, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan. The new girl walking by is Clint Kubiak, who all us fantasy football nerds are in love with. But with their pre-snap motion and how they're using it, it's so effective, and this defense can't stop it. Clint Kubiak was with the Niners last year as part of the staff that just destroyed the Eagles with Debo and CMC. That's when the really downfall happened last year. Clint Kubiak knows what to do. The Saints are going to score points.
The Falcons, I realize, have completed their Pennsylvania tour, their little circuit. Played the Steelers in week 1, who did have a pass rush. They lost. Then they play the Eagles, who did not have a pass rush, and then they somehow eked out a 1-point win. That seems to be the difference. Also, how does it feel to be a second-rate team in your own state?
Yeah, they're terrible.
The Steelers should not be 2-0, but they're...
Remember, this was part of the plan in the preseason when we talked about the Steelers' opening schedule. It's super easy, but, in late October through the end of the season, It gets absolutely brutal.
Just like we all thought, Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, they would be 2-0. That's how we imagined this year being, not them starting at all, and definitely not their teams, starting out this way. Man, football's... Can we pause and just say how much variance there is in football? It's fun, and yet...
It's so fun.
Week to week, I don't think people realize it. And the best way to realize it is look at your survivor pools and look how you probably got punched in the gut if you played the Ravens or you played the Bengals in week 1. There's so much more variance than people realize week to week. And we'll find some more matchups that we're man, that team is favored by 10 points. They lost. It changes. So, we talked about the popular games. We'll talk more about Baltimore and Dallas. That's going to be another game that we talk about. Which one do you feel like will be sneaky this week? Sneaky.
Yeah, you just mentioned Sam Darnold. 5th in the league currently in quarterback efficiency, which is a metric that looks at EPA and completion percentage over expectation combined. Sam Darnold's playing well. And, I don't want to take anything away from him, but it just shows you how good of a play caller and how good of the scheme is with Kevin O'Connell. He's doing awesome. When we talked about it last year, right, with Nick Mullins throwing for 350 and 3. The scheme is just great. Now, we need to make sure we look at what's going on with Justin Jefferson this week, who's dealing with a quad contusion, but assuming he's there, obviously you get excited about the game. Houston at Minnesota, the way that I think this is going to set up really well for Houston, they gave Purdy a little bit of fits with the blitzing and all that sort of stuff. If Stroud can pick them apart and force the issue with the Vikings to throw, this is one that I think could hit the over and be really fun in the Dome in Minnesota. But of course, there's some key injuries we got to monitor.
Yeah, no, it's a fun matchup for sure. I just want to throw out sneaky, as in I have no idea what's going to happen in this game between Chicago and Indianapolis. I don't think either of those quarterbacks know what's going to happen when the ball leaves their hand. There was a really funny video I posted about Caleb Williams. And by the way, the internet's really good at its job. Just really good at finding clips, finding funny things to say. But it was 4th and 18. And somebody posted a clip of Caleb Williams who was basically all you doubters, you had no idea. This guy's going to put the team on his back. Watch me. And it's 4th and 18 and just nowhere. He basically throws it out of bounds. It's just nowhere close to completing it. These two are bottom 3 in off-target rate, So 28% of Anthony Richardson's throws are completely off target. Caleb Williams is 24%. Bryce Young, 25%. So that's the group right there. That's the crew. But they do run. We know that they have the physical tools. So it's one of those games where I get it in a tournament if you can find the right pieces. Chicago's defense is pretty good, and they showed that against the Texans. The Colts defense, not so great. I think you can run on them, but I hate DeAndre Swift. So that game's a wild card. Just throwing it out there. No idea what's going to happen. Which game do you want to be underweight on?
I guess you didn't look ahead in the doc,
I did not.
Because I get what you're saying. I probably can't get there on Chicago and Indy. The Anthony Richardson issues are well documented at this point from like a real life standpoint. And this Bears secondary is very, very good. I know Nico had an awesome game against them, but that's Nico and that's Stroud and that's what they do. But Chicago's defense is great. And Richardson has major issues as a passer. Combine that with the Chicago offense, it just looks broken right now. They announced on the broadcast that the heel issue for Keenan Allen is plantar fasciitis, which has been going on since last year. So this is a chronic issue. He hasn't practiced last week. I don't think he plays. Rome Odunze was probably not 100% in that game, but Waldron's not putting him in a position to succeed. We talked about the Gerald Everett thing. DeAndre Swift can't run the football. The offensive line looks a mess. It's a rookie quarterback. I just think so many things have to go right this week for that game to hit that I'm not really looking that way, even in tournaments. So I get the game theory standpoint. I think it's just going to take a leap of faith to play that game.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think that game, you could have 2 or 3 pieces that's like, man, that game went off because of the physical tools there. You also could see that game just be a complete dud, and neither of those offense can just sustain drives because their quarterbacks can't complete the ball. I'm bringing up Green Bay and Tennessee. I'll talk about it later. Tennessee, I think, is a great defensive play at home. They know Malik Willis better than any other team. They said, we don't want this guy anymore because he's not good at football. But Will Levis, his own coaching staff, hates him. I just love that Brian Callahan has been called out twice in 2 weeks of being like, yeah, I said that out loud about my own quarterback. That just doesn't happen in the NFL.
No. I mean, in week 1, what was the quote? If we just would have punted on first down, we would have won the game. Week 2, he talked about, which to his credit, it was an absolutely egregious play where he did the backwards lateral or whatever and gave up points on the board. You can't do that in the league. So yeah, Will Levis's time as a starting quarterback, the clock is ticking.
What's crazy is we would have a very different narrative. That team was winning both of their games at halftime, and their defense looked really good. I watched all the Garrett Wilson snaps. Snead looked just as good. A couple of plays in the running game they gave up, to Brees and Braylon Allen. But overall, the Titans should have won that game, and I think they should have won the week before against the Bears. So we'd have a different narrative in place for Will Levis, but that team is you can't play them at all. You play their defense.
Do you think Mason Rudolph starts games this year?
I think so. If you're a coach and you cannot veil yourself from sharing those things publicly, it's one thing to have it behind closed doors, oh man, this guy's doesn't have a lot. And then you saw that with Dave Canales. He was like, we talked about it and we're moving on. I think that Callahan actually already feels that way of man, if we just ran the ball and took care of it, we'd be 2-0 right now. So at the end of the day, I think...
Yeah. That's the vibe I get too.
Yeah, I think I would definitely say that Mason Rudolph will start. That's another crazy statement to say about 2024. Which team are you most confident hits the over in their team implied total?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit with the stats of how bad this Eagles defense has been, but I think the Saints can put up 25 plus points. The Eagles are on a short week, very emotional loss last night, obviously. The Saints offense is the hottest in football, and I mentioned some of the connecting the dots here with Clint Kubiak being on that San Francisco staff last year, just knowing how to win against this defense with pre-snap motion, play action. I don't think the Eagles are going to be able to stop it. So give me the Saints to put up 25 plus points at home this week.
We talked about the Niners earlier. It's okay, they still have a healthy team implied total. It's at 25.3. And going back to last year, the beginning of last year, in 49ers wins, here's what they've scored. Okay, so their team implied total is 25. Here's what they've scored in wins: 30, 30, 30, 35, 42, 34, 27, 31, 42, 28, 45, 27, and 32. Betz, based on those numbers, were they over in all of them?
I think they were over in all of them but one.
No, all of them.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe the 27, one of the 27s, they might have been under like a 28.
Oh, no. I'm just saying, were they over
but...
this total?
Oh, yes, they were over. Thank you. Math is hard. Yes, let me just crunch some numbers real quick. Yep, they were over 25.3 in every game.
Okay. Yes, I didn't lead you quite well, but yes, 49ers and wins, they were over this. And then the Rams, they've allowed the most yards per play and the highest yards per attempt in the NFL. I'm back on Purdy stacks this week, and we'll talk about it in just a second, but Kittle, I think, is a really strong play this week. I know Ayuk will look good too. Which team are you most confident hits the under of their team implied total?
Yeah, I'm going to take under on the Broncos here, 16.8. They're on the road at Tampa. Very tough scheme and defense with Todd Bowles. Now, unfortunately, I think Vita Vea is certainly going to miss this game. Kalijah Cansey, their defensive tackle, has been out. Antoine Winfield Jr. is out, the starting safety. But even with some of those injuries last week, they still held the Lions in check. So it's tough to see 17 points from this Bo Nix-led offense, given the state of how they have looked through 2 games.
Yeah, and I have sad news. The Dolphins are going to be neutered for a while, man. I mean, their team implied total is 18.3. They're playing at Seattle. Skylar Thompson games, where he started or played a majority of the snaps, the team scored 17, 16, and 11 points. And in one playoff game, you can go there and go, oh, look, they scored 31 points. I need to go through just to do the 6-6 study, but it might have been the worst playoff performance on an EPA per play that I've seen in a very long time. He completed 40% of his passes, was sacked 4 times. He was really bad, and he's not an NFL quarterback. So I think other than maybe Achane, who has seen the receiving work, I just can't put my money around any other Dolphin. Like, no chance at all, so I don't mind taking their under, and that's just going to be a gross game. I looked at Tyreek and the salary, and I was just like, well, I guess this is dead for a second. Like, you can't even go there. You can't pay it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, if you end up playing him in tournaments, you're basically just hoping he catches a slant and takes it to the house.
All right, moving on.
Salary standouts.
Betz and I are going to walk through and look at some of the salaries for this week. Just our first gut reaction. It's not all there. I do have a take that might be different than yours at quarterback. So start us off.
Oh. Yeah, I like Kyler in this spot. 6,900 at home against the Lions in the best game environment on the slate. Now, I think what you're going to talk about is Aiden Hutchinson, who's just been unreal through 2 games.
He's good at the game.
And how Kyler performs when he's under pressure, which I do want to hear your thoughts on that. But just my initial gut take was like still sub K for Kyler, who's not only shown a ceiling, obviously, last week, but he's still giving you some rushing production to help elevate the floor, too. So what are your thoughts on Kyler this week?
Kyler under pressure has kind of been a constant theme. Like, you saw it this past week against the Rams, where it was like, dude, he could do whatever he wanted to. Even that touchdown throw to Michael Wilson, he's dancing around. But even when he's doing that, like, video game style, just kind of running around and just throwing it, it didn't feel like he was that worried. And then did you see the still photo of him after he threw it? Did you see this?
No, I haven't seen it.
He threw it, and he did a Steph Curry where he basically turned around and put up his arms before the ball was even like in Wilson's hand. Like, he just knew that it was in, knew that it was 6 points. So Kyler last year, his yards per attempt under pressure went all the way down to 5.6. Okay, so that's like Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, Taylor Heineke territory. Like, he turns into a quarterback. You saw it in week 1 where it's short. He can get there on his legs, but I do think the Detroit pass rush will cause issues. And so I think Kyler makes sense. I do like a couple other quarterbacks, though, like Dak at 6.6 at home against a Ravens team that, I looked this up, I had to make sure, they've given up the most passing yards in the league through 2 weeks. They've been bad.
I think the most, well, I don't know about last night, if it matters or if it factors in, but entering Monday Night Football, I think they also had allowed the most 15-plus yard pass plays in the league.
Yeah, I think that Dak is somebody that I have circled in my player pool right now, 6.6 at home. Brock Purdy at 6K. We already talked about that game, the team applied total. And then I'm just mentioning it because it's fun to say, but Andy Dalton at 4.8. I'll probably throw him in a tournament just to feel alive.
Yeah, just like that Anthony Richardson ticket, it's fun to talk about, but probably won't work.
We'll always have this memory. Like, I think it's A.A. Milne, the one who wrote.
Just remember the friends you made along the way. That's it.
See, I had a different quote I was going to share.
Oh, please do.
It's we didn't know we were making memories. We just knew we were having fun. Like I
love that.
Dude, when you're a dad, that one hits real hard, dude. That one crushes you.
Put that on a t-shirt.
I know. And then put Andy Dalton's face on it. I just knew we were having fun throwing money in an incinerator for Andy Dalton and DFS.
And then on the back, it's a Mike Glennon picture.
Dude, Mike Glennon's the man. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about our running back salary standouts. Last week, we had a couple of strong plays. Looking at the field this week, I don't feel quite as bullish, but the top running backs in salary are Saquon, 7.7, Kamara at 7.5. I feel like those will be a deciding point, and they're seeing a ton of work. I looked this up with Saquon. He's seeing 40% of the team's targets and total targets and total rush attempt. That's insane. Kamara's at 38%. So they're both workhorses. We care about them. Do you lean Kamara early in the week based on just like pain alone?
Yeah, this is just emotional reaction, obviously. I think both are awesome plays. You probably can't fit both. So to me, I think the cash game build is going to be one of those guys, which I guess I lean Kamara just for like the higher chance at, 6 catches. Like that's not likely, but I think it's more possible than with Saquon. But the ground game for Philly has been so good, but the matchup for Kamara is just elite. So that's going to be really tough. I'll probably think about that throughout the week before we talk on Friday. But to me, like those two at the top stand out. And then I think everybody's going to play Jordan Mason again. Why not? With the team total taking on a Rams team that's decimated by injury, they're favored. It makes so much sense after he got 20 carries again last week.
I like Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he was somebody that was in our pool this past week. He was 6.6. He's 6.8, so just a little bit more expensive against the Cardinals, who have improved as a rush defense, but last year on the road, 5 targets per game. He's more involved in the red zone than he was last year. So I feel like Gibbs is somebody that you can just feel safe. We know the game environment's great. And when I'm creating my pools, like the first thing I'm looking at is points per dollar. So our projections, salary, how does that look? Then on top of that, it's like, man, I kind of need somebody from this game. And I feel like Gibbs is probably my favorite right now. Like I'm probably not going to play Connor, who we loved last week. Is just a terrible matchup. They've allowed the second fewest fantasy points to running backs this year. They were number 1 last year. I feel like Connor is in tournaments. I get it as a contrarian play, but in cash, I can't do it. But I want somebody from this game, and Gibbs is the one I kind of have circled.
Yeah, makes sense. I think he's probably more of a tournament play for me this week, but I definitely get it. And then same kind of vibes is Devon Achane. I guess, in cash, like he's probably going to project well enough at 7K, but it's just a matter of how you build this week where, yeah, like as a runner, he's been awesome, but his workload as a receiver is just unreal. Like it feels like rookie year Alvin Kamara or like second year Alvin Kamara, where it's like every week,
yes,
you're getting 6-7 catches, not just targets, like catches. And they're all so high percentage that, with Skylar Thompson, I think that's probably going to happen again with this Dolphins offense. You mentioned some of the systemic concerns with Skylar Thompson that definitely brings the ceiling down, obviously, quite a bit, but just it's hard to pass on running backs that can catch, 5 to 7 balls in a week.
It's week 3, and we're still talking about Jordan Mason because his salary went up $1,000. So it's going to look a little different on points per dollar this week, but the matchup is so great against the Rams. In week 1, they gave up 163 rushing yards to the Lions, and this past week against the Cardinals, I had to look this up, 231 rushing yards they allowed against the Cardinals. So I think the Rams miss Aaron Donald. I think that's probably something that they're a little sad about. But Jordan Mason at 6,200 makes sense. And then I said I hated this game earlier, but I kind of interested. I mean, I know you're hurt from last year, but Tony Pollard at 6K against a run funnel team. The Packers are and have been a run funnel for years. I kind of like it. Like I don't mind him as a home favorite.
Yeah, I mean, you think about how this is broken for Tony Pollard. Tajay Spears is banged up with an ankle issue. We'll see on him. Their head coach doesn't like the quarterback, so give him one more excuse to take the ball out of Will Levis's hands, right? Hand it off to Tony Pollard. Yeah, I think he's really interesting this week. Probably more of a tournament play with Jordan Mason sitting right there at 6,200, but definitely in my pool this week.
All right, moving on to wide receiver. You talked up CeeDee Lamb last week. It looked like it was going super well. You had a long touchdown, and then the second half, I don't really know what they were going for. They were going for a lot of Jalen Tolbert, your boy. And I didn't really understand what was going on in the second half. But CD is going to project great. Baltimore, we were talking about how bad their pass defense is. 14.5 passing first downs given up per game. It's the highest in the NFL. So I think that's what you're going to do. You're going to lean into Dak stacks. I'm already a big fan this week of going that direction. And CD is expensive, 8.8. But of the top tier priced up guys, he's my favorite. Nico Collins should be $1,000 more. Like he's only 7.3. So I'm writing Nico down right now just because he's so cheap. Matchup isn't great, but with wide receivers, you and I have always mentioned this. Like I ignore, this is going to be a tough matchup, or this cornerback's going to be on him. Like most cornerbacks don't shadow. We're playing in zone. So just go for the elite wide receiver, pay up, and get different. So Nico and CD are like the top priced ones.
Yeah, and then if you just go a little bit below, Nico Devonta Smith's usage last night without A.J. Brown was truly elite alpha type stuff, 10 targets. Going back to the playoff game last year when A.J. Brown had to miss against the Bucks, Devonta Smith was just fed. So you're probably getting somewhere between 8 and 12 targets for Devonta Smith in this game at 6,900. That looks quite nice. And then with Debo out, Brandon Ayuk at 6,200 against this Rams defense looks incredible as well.
I love Smith so much. Have I mentioned that on this podcast at all? Ever?
I think a couple times, yeah.
He's just awesome, man. So Malik Neighbors, he gets a little bit of a price bump. It's now $6,400. Still not that expensive, man, when you consider the big plays, the receptions. Browns is a tough matchup. So if you are like one of those people that do care about matchups, then it's not great. He's not going to project as well as he did last week against the Commanders. But I just wanted to mention him because $6,400 is still too cheap. Let's talk about the 49ers fallout. So if Debo's out, where do you want to go between Ayuk
He's out.
and Kittle?
Man, that's a tough call early in the week, and I don't really have a strong take because I'm going to have plenty of exposure to both guys. I will say Kittle just feels like a guy that could explode this week. They just put one of their starting safeties on IR with a fractured scapula, did the Rams. So one more injury, why not? And Kittle at 5,700, 7 catches last week. Like, I know it's PPR, and Kittle typically isn't like a PPR guy, but against this Rams defense, he could explode. So if I had to pick one for cash games, it would probably be Kittle. But I love Ayuk this week as well.
Yeah, and Kittle is one of those players that usually feels like he's tournament only because of his volatility. But I looked up his splits with Debo out. It's 12 games. In PPR, he's averaged 17 points per game, 80 receiving yards, 7 targets. So at his price point, I think he's my preferred. Man, I tried to zig this past week with Ayuk, and it just felt like he never really got going, got integrated the same way as like a focal point. He did have an end zone target that didn't work out, but yeah, I lean the same direction. We'll see. Do you feel like Ayuk, and then also I just need to mention Juwan Jennings is super cheap. He's going to get way more snaps. He's 4,100. Do you feel like people are just going to insert Ayuk automatically though?
Probably. But then in cash games, like I was mentioning, we probably don't want both Ayuk and Kittle. I think for tournaments, the Purdy double stack with those two is going to be just wildly rostered. So it's not wrong or bad. It's just something to consider. But yeah, I think people are definitely going to try to jam Ayuk in there in this matchup.
How are you handling the Saints wide receivers? So Olave and Shaheed. It feels like Shaheed's always been you only play him in tournaments. That's just what he is. But at 5,300, his involvement says that he's more than that, and he's going to project okay, like you just know that there's big plays. So is he just, hey, I can't play him in tournaments, I'm still not there? Or I can't play him in cash?
So I think you can play him in cash, which is wild to say, but his role, the way they're using him, is so different than in previous seasons where it's always been just a deep threat and let's hope he catches this long bomb, which obviously they are using him in those routes, but they're using him on, like we said, pre-snap motion, slants, like, can you move the chains for us type routes, which never was his game before. So I think you can play him in cash. It's obviously highly volatile because of the fact that, they've only seen a handful of targets, both Olave and Shaheed. I think part of that is just game script related. Obviously, getting out to the Cowboys lead last week, they're not going to throw a ton in the second half. But I think both Olave and Shaheed are in play against this Philly defense.
Man, it's I feel like I can't even call him Derek Carr anymore. I just sent you the stats from Ian Hart. It's a Fantasy Life. But do you know that he has the lowest check down rate in the league? Like,
that is insane.
That's not the same quarter. This is a different person. So we need to rebrand Derek Carr into somebody completely different, because this is not the same person that we've looked at. His yards per attempt is 13 or something. It's just over the top, just crazy. I see you have Tank Dell on here. My heart is hurt because that team that I lost by 0.5 also had Tank Dell. So, but I think he's an intriguing tournament play at 5.2. Nobody's going to want to play him though.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think he's really interesting for tournaments. The price for his talent is just so cheap, and he did miss that catch last week, which he should have had. He would have run in for a 50-yard score.
Oh, cool.
If that happens, we're not talking about him the same way in this game, and Kyle wins his matchup, so he's happy. But yeah, I think Tank is super interesting, especially in tournaments if he's going to go overlooked.
All right, so I'm going to give you some cheaper names. You can go through them real quickly and tell me if you're interested at all. Demarcus Robinson is $5K for the Rams, so he actually went up $1,000 as the now Rams defunct wide receiver one. And it's I'm not really getting a discount here. They're going to probably be down against the 49ers. So are you interested at all in him?
Man, all these Rams guys, $5K for him. Tyler Johnson's 4,700. Tutu's 4,300. Whittington's 4,200. It feels like those guys should all be 500 to 1,000 cheaper. So I don't think you're really getting a discount. And just like last week, I think there's major systemic risk of, can these guys even do it in the NFL is a major question mark. So projections are probably going to like them, but just from a gut feel, I feel terrible about it.
Yeah, they're not punt plays anymore. This is a expensive price that you're paying at $5K. When you go up a little further, it's Rashid Shaheed at $5,300 in a way better game environment. JSN is $400 more. Jamison Williams is $800 more. All these other players feel like they have so much more upside. What about the Carolina guys? Thielen's $5K, Deontay Johnson's 4.9.
It's fine.
One of these guys is going to go off, and you're going to hate it, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going to hate it. The concern, though, for me is, I know Las Vegas had a really nice bounce back game last week. They've talked all offseason about the ground game. They got to get the ground game going. That's how we're going to win. They have been the worst run offenses in football, have the Raiders. Who do you get this week? The Panthers. If there's ever a defense that's going to fix your run game, it's the Panthers defense. So I just have this fear of they're going to go in there and establish it, and play clock is drained, and this game environment is just terrible. So I don't feel great about either guy, honestly.
All right, let me give you a name that you might light up about. What about Greg Dortch? You've heard of him. $4,500.
Oh, now we're talking about good players. The Dortch, yeah, 4,500. I didn't actually look at his usage last week. Do you know what it was off the top of your head?
No, but I can tell you this, that the Lions have been the worst team against the slot so far. Cooper Kupp in week 1, Chris Godwin in week 2. So I think he's going to get some opportunities. I mentioned earlier, Kyler's splits against pressure. The way that he does stuff is he basically just dinks and dunks over the middle of the field. That's Dortch land. So Dortch and McBride, I think, are going to be the ones that get a little uptick for me in usage this week. Where the Dortch, not even in my player pool last week. No chance. This week, I'm fine with it. It's whatever. Last name here, Jalen Naylor Vikings wide receivers caught a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks, and he's actually looked kind of good. That's a game environment we're kind of interested in. We know Justin Jefferson, if he plays, is going to get a ton of attention.
Yeah, 4,400 for Naylor is not too bad. He has seen 1 target and 4 targets, though. So we need to be very careful about chasing the touchdown production. Also in week 1, he was entering that week banged up with an ankle issue from late in camp. So perhaps that gets better as, the last couple weeks go on. Jordan Addison probably not playing in this game. So that would obviously be the only situation where you would even consider him for cash games. But yeah, I think he deserves to be in your player pool.
At tight end, I mentioned McBride. He has a 29% target share, which leads all tight ends in the NFL. He looks good. Sam Laporta is kind of the forgotten man. He's 6K now, and he has 7 targets. Only 5 of them are first read targets. That's as many as your boy Hayden Hurst and Brenton Strange. So don't just look at this and say, okay, Sam Laporta is not good anymore. It's just kind of been on the first 2 weeks have been dictated, but he's an interesting tournament play. We like Kittle in that mid 5K range. Brock Bowers, my boy, at 5.4 sees a $1,000 increase, but he's been targeted on 30% of his routes. I'm not going to go after him this week. I just don't like the game environment. We mentioned earlier, it's gross. But man, Brock Bowers, we're going to be talking about him over and over and over again this year. So I just wanted to bring up his name. And then, you just see Mark Andrews' price?
So sad.
It's so sad, man. Like,
what is it, 4,800?
4,800. He actually went down $200, although he was way ahead of Likely in a lot of the usage stuff. So he's only $100 more than Likely right now. But I went back and I was like, when's the last time we've seen Mark Andrews at 4,800 where he wasn't hurt? It's 2019, man. Like,
pain.
This isn't normal. So I think Andrews is interesting. In a game environment we like, Baltimore and Dallas, he's way too cheap. I mean, you're paying 4,800 for like Tyler Johnson, basically. Like, give me Mark Andrews as just a flex position ahead of him. And I don't like any of the punts, by the way, so far.
Schoonman? Saw 6 targets last week.
Yeah, I played some Schoonman in tournaments. That's Luke Schoonmaker, for those of you out there writing and scoring at home. What do we know about Ferg Daddy?
Yeah, so they have said, Stephen Jones, I believe it was this time, said they expect Fergie to play off the MCL and bone bruise this week. We'll see. I would never take anything from a front office member's, perspective for injuries, especially in Dallas, on that front. But bone bruises can linger for a couple weeks, so I wouldn't be shocked if he sat. Not saying that's a guarantee. I just don't know it yet. So this obviously is a play if Ferguson would be out. Luke Schoonmaker did see 6 targets last week. If you're getting 10 DraftKings points from a 3,300 tight end, I mean, I would sign up for that every single week. So the game environment we talked about with Baltimore is pretty sweet. So I think he's at least in consideration. But you and I both agree Kittle looks awesome this week.
At defense, the Raiders are going to be the team that everybody picks up in their home leagues. They're really expensive, though. 3.7. I can't do that. But there are some actually options that I'm interested in this week that are cheaper. Tampa Bay is 3K against Bo Nix. That sounds great. I love Tennessee. Like, Malik Willis threw the ball 12 times, something like that this past week. They know him, and they're only 2.7 at home. So I think the Titans are my early favorite in the week.
My concern, though, with that is you need dropbacks, usually, to produce fantasy points for defense, just to get sacks, turnovers. And if they're just like, you know what, Malik, you're not throwing a pass. Like, no chance. How many opportunities do you really get? So that's my only question mark. I like Chicago against Anthony Richardson, 2,600. That's so cheap for how bad of a passer A-Rich has been. So the Bears, definitely interesting to me. It
is interesting. Like, Tennessee feels like a really safe floor play. And Chicago has a good defense where you could see like a massive upside of pick sixes and those kind of things. So I think I still lean Tennessee for a floor, but I also got to see later on in the week where we're at in roster percentage. So if you want to play with us, go to ballersdfs.com. It will direct you to our DraftKings League, Fantasy Footballers DFS, Borg Betz. Betz will be writing up a Thursday article. This week it is the Patriots and the Jets. By the way, I'm taking the Jets in my survivor pool. Feel pretty.
What could possibly go wrong?
I know. I was looking at all the other ones. I was like, I don't think this could go wrong, but what do I know? So, but Betz has an article Thursday night. We'll also release a contest on Thursday night, so you can play with us on DraftKings Betz. Sign us off.
Well, from a depressed Eagles fan to you, I hope you guys have a great week. We'll be back Friday to preview the main slate and talk about cash games, how we're going to stack it, some props, all that good stuff. We'll see you then. Have an awesome week.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at thefantasyfootballers.com.